This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this is our Eastern Conference Finals preview between the Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat. Two teams who've taken two very different routes to get to this final destination of the Eastern Conference. And I can tell you this, they are certainly going to make for an interesting battle. I don't think this is going to be a pushover by any stretch of the imagination between either of these teams. And I'm just excited for my ability and my man's ability for us to kind of break this down, because both of these teams have heavily dissed us in our predictions. So I think it's only right that we proper justice to give discussions to it. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shotsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother, Mr. Warren Shaw. I know that under COVID-19 pretenses, you can't be having, like that good old-fashioned South backyard party, that the Miami Heat is actually getting to an Eastern Conference final, an achievement that they haven't, since, 2012?
LeBron days, so it's not too far ago. But, at the end of the day, listen, I'm in the South Florida area. We're not shy about it on our podcast. We try not to beat our fans, listeners over the head with it, but we're Celtics guys here. So living in the South Florida area with all these Miami Heat fans and hopefuls, I'm getting all kinds of tweets and messages and DMs now about the series already. And, Miami folks, they're excited. And this is not going to be a diss to those who I know personally, but Miami in general is a kind of a fair weather city. So see the Heat now doing well, and they all come out. They coming out like Corona. So it's a little bit wild to live in this space right now. But at the end of the day, these are two great teams, as you alluded to. The Celtics took the circuitous route, They kind of came around this way. Miami went straight right down the middle, but, busting through the Pacers and the Bucks ultimately. But it's going to be a good series.
The Miami Heat did take kind of a bad boys Lowry kind of move, right? You know what I'm saying? Just go right straight through the front door. Just went right through the Bucks' front door. You know what I'm saying? And stole the antlers. Took the antlers off of right out of the main living room, right?
Might have moved some people out of town as well too as a result of that series. That's another conversation for another day, though.
Absolutely. This to me is the makings for a great contest, and I know that there are going to be quite a few different topics that we're going to get into when we're talking about the Heat and the Celtics. But one of the reasons why, and I think we touched on this when we were, linking up with our boys Nick, Jordan, and Joe, watching the Celtics-Raptors Game 7. One of the things that I really appreciate about the possibilities of a Celtics Heat matchup for the Eastern Conference Finals is that these are two genuinely matched up teams, right? Like when you look at the roster up and down, every position is covered where it just doesn't seem so, obscenely outmatched. The Miami Heat will relatively play with a small lineup where even their power forward is their center, right? And the Celtics are basically playing with the matchup where, their power forward is going to be their center because they don't have really anyone big enough in length to really force or be intimidating in the paint. So I just like all around how these teams are so versatile that we don't know what Stevens or Spoelstra is going to throw out in this particular series. They're not going to be able to take the same approach they did with their previous opponents, being the Bucks and the Raptors. And I think that's what's going to make this series very compelling, even from the, just from the tip. I think this is going to be a compelling series automatically.
Yeah, I can't disagree, I think, with that at all. Miami, to me, is the deeper of the two teams. The Celtics may have an ace in the hole, if you will, if Hayward is able to return at some point throughout the course of the series. You also see how he plays and how he responds to that ankle. So does he come off the bench? Because Marcus Smart has been just so immense, especially defensively. But Smart has hit some very timely threes for the Celtics throughout the course of the Raptors series as well, and do you just kind of go with what's been working because what you've had to, or do you just go back to what you've normally been doing with Hayward if and when he's able to return to the series? And again, I think the coaching matchup is definitely right out there. Our guy, I think it was, the partner as always, hit us up a couple of weeks ago about, kind of ranking the coaches that were left in the bubble. And this was a couple of weeks ago when more coaches were actually in the bubble. But to me, Spo is the top of my list, and then Stevens is, kind of right behind him there. So I think these are the two best coaches in the playoffs that are left right now. And, it's going to be a good one. It really and truly is. Miami is very well equipped to handle what Boston has, especially on the wings and on the perimeter. And then you just kind of wonder now, did the Celtics, because of that series with Toronto, did they grow up in a certain way now? Did they build character that will allow them to push them through and get past a very, very tough team? But we'll see.
We'll definitely see. I may beg to differ a little bit about, the best coaches primarily, is going to be coming out of the East. I mean, Doc Rivers, I might still edge him. We'll see. We'll see if whether or not they take care of their business and eventually can propel the Clippers to their first NBA Finals. More importantly, be able to propel the Clippers to their first Western Conference Finals, right? And I think that to me is an achievement within itself. Now, as we're talking about the Celtics and we're talking about the Heat, I think one of the things, and I want to get this out of the way because there's so much other things that we need to discuss regarding the personnel, the players, and matchups and things. But what I actually saw from Brad Stevens, again, I agree with you. He's among one of the best coaches that's remaining in this playoff. But he's also, again, to me, one of those coaches that I have to look at him skeptically again, because just as easily as he could have coached his team to the Eastern Conference Finals, he essentially could have coached his team out of the Eastern Conference Finals, especially in this Game 7. And so I guess that is just, more to the point of when you have a coach like Coach Stevens, you rely so heavily on the fact that he normally gets it right most of the time, that sometimes he overthinks or overcoaches the situation where he takes himself and he takes the personnel that I think should be best equipped to help propel him where he needs to be out of where they need to be, right? Yeah. And so that to me is one of the, I guess you can call it one of the bigger indictments, on Coach Stevens. It's almost as if he's the accidental coach, right? Like he makes these decisions that you shouldn't have to look at him and say, well, yeah, it was on Coach Stevens not doing this or not having these guys in here to say that this team lost. Usually it just comes down to the team just didn't execute. The team just didn't, teams just didn't do what they were supposed to do. But more times than not that I've seen in this playoffs, Stevens, to me, has put more emphasis on why he makes some of the decisions that he makes when it's not even necessary. And, I think where I'm going with this, Shaw, because you saw me yelling to the top of my lungs, just certain personnel at certain times of the game and the confidence that he needs to have on the guys that he needs to, on the floor. And even at a point where he needs to help the players help themselves when they're not out there doing the heady, smart things in order to finish out games. I think that's when Stevens has to step in and not just assume, oh, these are grown men, they'll figure it out. Nah, man, this is a trip to the Eastern Conference Finals. This is a trip to possibly getting to the NBA Finals. Sometimes when you realize that these guys just don't have it right then and there, you got to step in and you got to, put your imprint on why you're the head coach and not let it be where it just falls on the players to figure this out, no matter if they're veterans or if they're rookies.
Yeah, I mean, again, for our fans and listeners, we're obviously talking about a very specific situation or situations. I think with Stevens in the semifinals versus Toronto, some people, Cal and I disagree a little bit on how Game 3 ended. Number one, and then also in Game 7, the minutes of Grant Williams, where we definitely both agree Grant Williams shouldn't have been the guy out there. And I understand I know what Stevens did there, and I think you do it as well too. I mean, he was trying to protect Tice, and we don't need to talk about the Raptors series here, so in general, but talk about Stevens and his coaching style. You're trying to protect Tice, and then ironically brought Tice in and immediately got a fouling out anyway. But those are big minutes to try to put a rookie into, and a lot of that is just a result of personnel and who you have on the floor as well. And I think the one thing that And I'm not gonna excuse Stevens on that call, because I do think it was the wrong call that he got away with, so to speak. But a lot of it is again, it's a result of personnel. You couldn't have put Robert Williams out there. He's not laterally quick enough to stick with Siakam. That's where you miss a guy like Gordon Hayward, even again, because Siakam, as tall and as more athletic as he doesn't play big. But versus Grant Williams, he felt like he could have done that. And the Celtics guarded Siakam with Smart. They guarded him with Jaylen Brown. They guarded him with Tatum a little bit. And you're damn sure that Hayward probably would have also gotten some time there as well. So I think being that man down, a person that's so important to your overall rotation, really limited Stevens in his ability to deploy the right guys at the right time. But I still think putting Williams in that situation was an atrocious thing. But Williams still had a couple offensive rebounds that helped. So it's like one of those things, like he threw some shit at the wall and it stuck for a little while. And that's what coaches do sometimes. I mean, look at all the defenses Nick Nurse ran at Boston too. So in general, though, I think your point about Stevens, he's got to still be in the top three. So, Doc has been living off that 2008 title for a very long time now. And, he's very obviously still a player's coach and all that. So I think they're neck and neck, but obviously Rivers has more historical success.
Well, to your point regarding Stevens, now you're dealing with a Miami Heat team that has an Erik Spoelstra. And I think your room for error is now even smaller than what you were dealing with Nick Nurse, right? So I agree with you. Not having Gordon Hayward really does, mess up how you want to situate yourself, especially coming towards the end of a game, and specifically here at Game 7. But I do think that if you're going to go at it, and I guess maybe I'm looking at this kind of like as playing devil's advocate to myself. You have to have confidence in the guys that you're putting out there on the floor. So I have to believe that he has enough confidence that he thinks Grant Williams can give him those minutes. But I do think, though, at times he has to be able to recognize very quickly that that player could be in over their heads. That player could very well easily tip the scales where it was being used as an advantage for you and now is being used against you. So, and I guarantee you that, and we're talking about this now as we talk about the Miami Heat, this is a Heat team that seems to have done a fantastic job throughout the playoffs. I'm not talking about when they struggled in the bubble. I'm talking about the playoff Miami Heat team. This version of the Miami Heat will expose your weaknesses. And it may not even be a question of weaknesses in talent as much as it is a question of weakness in execution. And for the Boston Celtics, part of their Achilles heel is while they're being praised as being one of the better defensive teams remaining in the playoffs, their defensive execution at times can be very questionable. And it's part of the reason why this went to a 7-game series, when they could have outright taken a stranglehold in the series with the Toronto Raptors and probably only put it to 4 or 5, maybe even 6 games. It wound up being a 7-game series because down the stretch, they just did not lock down defensively to prevent teams like the Toronto Raptors to go on the kind of runs that they made. And with a Miami Heat team that has been running on all cylinders offensively to a point where one of the top 3 teams defensively in the Milwaukee Bucks was not able to stop the Miami Heat, that's going to be a problem. And your window of error is very small when you have a team clicking like the Miami Heat do.
I love that point more than anything else. I think the Celtics get the unfortunate, I guess, whatever it is, the unfortunate job of trying to stop a team that is now just like a peaking, like everything is happening for them at the right time. There was a lull for the Heat. They started off great throughout the first, 3 months of the season. They were as high as, I think, a 3 seed. They were higher than Boston for a while. Then their defense fell off a cliff for a little bit. They started turning the ball over. They're one of the league leaders in turnovers. Then, righted the ship a little bit, made the trade for Crowder, Iguodala, et cetera, and Solomon Hill, too. Forget about that. Then the COVID. And they are just a completely different team since the Orlando restart. They are a team that's confident. And if you remember, I said this was my sleeper team. Like, there's one team that's going to give people problems in the East. If anybody could be a sleeper or a dark horse, it was Miami, because of how well they're coached, because of the defense that they're capable of playing, and more importantly, because of their conditioning. Like, They're just a very well and structured organization. And Boston's defense at times falls off from the 3-point line. And that is not something you can do against this Heat team, which is now percentage points behind Denver as we record in the bubble in terms of 3-point shooting. And they're going to let it fly. And they got guys out there who don't give a damn. We always talk about on our show in playoff time specifically where you need an a-hole. You need a guy who's like, I don't give a shit. The Heat have like 7 of those guys. Gordon Hayward doesn't give a shit about taking a big three. Butler doesn't give a shit about taking a big three. Duncan Robinson, Tyler Herro, Myers Leonard, Kelly Olynyk, all those, Jay Crowder, all those guys will take big threes, big shots that can break your back. And this is the one time where we always say, and it's really interesting, kind of contradict myself there a little bit. Toronto, with Toronto, you wondered who was the guy, right? It was like, is it Lowry? Is it Van Vliet? Is it Siakam? And it's like, I think Stan Van Gundy was saying, it was like, they lost because they didn't.
That's what hurt them.
Yeah, because they didn't have the guy.
Rely on someone stepping up to be the guy.
But it's different from Miami. Mm-hmm. It is. And I don't know why it sounds like very much like a contradiction, but Miami's perfectly fine. In the 3 games Boston and Miami played this year, 3 different guys led Miami in scoring. It was Jimmy Butler missed the last game or in Atlanta restart. So, take that for what it is, but that's the game that Miami actually won, in Orlando in the bubble. But Duncan Robinson, Goran Dragic, Jimmy Butler, all those guys have led Miami back. Bam Adebayo, and Duncan Robinson tied for scoring in that 3rd game. So Miami has no problem. They are fine. It's your turn. You got it going. No problem. And I think Boston has to make sure that they are very wary that they guard everybody, especially those damn dribble handoffs that Miami will run incessantly to get guys open looks from the 3-point line.
Yeah, well, so you bring up so many great points. The first thing that I'm going to put emphasis on to what you're talking about regarding how the Miami Heat are a different breed of 3-point shooting. Tonight, as we're recording this preview, the Game 7 between the Celtics and the Raptors basically shot 28% from 3. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, this was a recipe for disaster for a team like the Toronto Raptors, that if they couldn't get the 3 ball, because they were one of the better teams shooting the 3 ball, if they weren't able to get the 3 ball going for them, they were clearly either going to make this game a lot closer than necessary, or they were going to probably wind up on the losing end of this particular game. The fact that the Celtics shot as poorly, to me, was more indicative of the fact that this is what the Celtics kind of like to do, but I'm just glad that they recognize that is not how they win, right? And I think that there's a big difference here. The Miami Heat execute their offense with the intent to get the best looking 3-point shot, rather than the Toronto Raptors, who just let it fly, not because they give a damn or don't give a damn. It's because they believe that they can shoot as equally as better as everyone else, and then reality sets in, and that's not what happens. The Miami Heat and Erik Spoelstra, and we talked about this, Erik Spoelstra sets up this team to give them the best looks possible to the strength of what they do. And if shooting the 3 ball right now is the strength of what they do that gets their offense going, he is executing offensive sets that make it easier for the Miami Heat to shoot that ball. So if you are the Boston Celtics and you are a team who is, while you're very good defensively, you are marginally good defending the 3, this is a recipe for disaster, because that means you now have to put the onus. You have to make it a priority to close out on Miami Heat shooters more than ever before. And playing against teams like the Toronto Raptors, against the Philadelphia 76ers, or maybe even like the Milwaukee Bucks, all of that is fool's gold. Whatever it is that they would have thrown against you, it's all fool's gold, because now you're dealing with the team who execute to open up shots at 3, rather than you're using it as a means to ploy that team's defensively to draw fouls, or, it just looks like a really good shot, and you have a really good player that shoots that. The Miami Heat, they execute with the intent to kill you with the 3.
Yeah, they do, and they don't care. Spoelstra realizes what his team is, and that's what, again, I think he's such a great coach. He still has defensive principles, but this is not a Heat team that historically has been chucking up threes the way that they have been now. But now they got some legitimate snipers out there, especially with Robinson and Harrell on the wings. And let's not forget, again, we talked about it in the last series with Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder going against his former team as well too. He's going to have a little something extra that he's going to want to maybe show, because, hey, they shipped him off, in a very successful year that Boston had in order to get Kyrie Irving. And, I think some of that's going to come back to not necessarily haunt Boston, but it's going to be a factor, I think, a little bit throughout the course of the series. I think Crowder's shooting has been much improved even since he's left Boston. And a lot of credit is going to Miami's coaching staff and their assistants for getting Crowder to be the kind of shooter that he's shown so far in the bubble. And I think this is something that the Celtics are going to have to make sure they address. The other issue, too, though, is that Miami is perfectly fine driving, and Dragic does a great job of, driving the basketball and waiting to see what the defense does. And then he kicks out, or he'll shoot his floater. This is where Marcus Smart is massive. I think a lot of people are going to be looking for Smart to guard Jimmy Butler. I think that's Jaylen Brown takes that assignment. I think Smart, when Dragic is out there, has to make sure Dragic is not getting into lane and with his dribble penetration and shooting those floaters that he loves to do. You have to stop the point of the initiation of the offense, and I think that's if Stevens has not put Smart on Dragic at least in multiple times throughout the course of the series, it might be a very, very tough series for Boston, because they cannot let that guy get off, and create havoc the way that he's been doing so far.
So one of the things I was just looking up on, NBA.com is which lineup can clearly be one of the more effective lineups for the Miami Heat. And obviously it's easy to see that if you start with Goran Dragic, Jimmy Butler, Jay Crowder, Bam Adebayo, Duncan Robinson, that team has yielded the most minutes and averages the most points in a 5-man starting lineup. But for a team who wants, if Spoelstra is looking at, say, from a plus-minus perspective, that could be very effective, they would probably go with the roster of Goran Dragic, Jimmy Butler, Jay Crowder, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Herro. And so this, again, can be, to what I was saying earlier before, Shaw, this could be exactly the reason why, if you're the Miami Heat, you like this matchup against the Boston Celtics, because now it does give you an excuse to run players like Tyler Herro or Derrick Jones Jr. or Kendrick Nunn. You have an opportunity where you can use a multiple guard set against the Boston Celtics. And if you are the Boston Celtics, you have to be very leery, because you are not as guard heavy as you like to be, right? It's great to see Kemba Walker, step up and do things that clearly the Celtics never got from Kyrie Irving to this degree. It's good to see Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown stepping up, and Marcus Smart being the MVP all-around Swiss Army knife player that he is for the Boston Celtics. But then after him, and you've brought this up numerous times, because listen, I almost thought I saw a 4 o'clock shadow growing on the side, growing on your head after, watching the Celtics bench come in. After Wanamaker, everything is a crapshoot with this team from a backcourt perspective. They don't have enough bodies to keep up with the fact that the Miami Heat have multiple looks and multiple players they could throw out as far as their backcourt goes. And so that, to me, is going to be a very, very interesting problem to see Stevens try and solve. Because, again, some of the most effective lineups that the Miami Heat have are when they are a guard-heavy based lineup, and they can just allow Bam and Jay Crowder to kind of do their thing, give space to let their guards do what they want to do, because Jimmy Butler plays like a guard as well, even though he plays the 3 and acts like a 4. I mean, he has multiple guys that can dribble, penetrate, create for themselves or create for others. That could be a problem again as well, too, for the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, so I'll double down even on that, too. I don't like anything Boston can throw at Adebayo. I don't like anything. Tyson's too slow. And Adebayo has a physicality where even if they put Tatum on him, he's not going to win that matchup, not historically. So I think Adebayo is a big key for them. He can take some of the Celtics bigs off the dribble if he wants to. He's showing some reliability and comfortability in that mid-range, especially from the elbow and free throw line and so forth. And I think that's a nice matchup that Spoelstra will be able to go to and determine what types of actions that run Adebayo in, for Miami in general. On the flip side, though, to Miami's better lineup, so to speak, especially with Herro and Dragic out there, that's what Boston can take advantage. The Heat have had a hard time. We talked about this with Nikias on our show as well, too. You have a hard time stopping dribble penetration. And this is where the Celtics, well, I know they love the three, but you've got to drive the basketball.
Exactly. This is where execution is totally critical for the Boston Celtics. And to your point, Shaw, it's all about the right personnel being out there to take advantage of those weaknesses, because they could very well be a weakness for the Miami Heat. But you would love to see the Boston Celtics get into the paint, force fouls, get to the free throw line, get cheap points. That mid-range jumper that was somewhat missing at the beginning of the series for Kemba Walker, and throughout the time that he was in the bubble, he's starting to find that. Where I have a problem with Kemba Walker right now, and it's really the only flaw when he, outside of him kind of being out of rhythm and getting off to slow starts, is the aggressiveness level that I would love to see him. I would love to see him be even more aggressive than what I previously have seen from him, not just in this past series with the Toronto Raptors, but even when he was in the series against the Philadelphia 76ers. He has the capacity and the quickness to get past most guards. He should be able to blow past Goran Dragic. Should be able to blow past Robinson or Herro, whoever he's throwing at him. You want to basically force Spoelstra to force Butler to even have to step up and take Kemba Walker from time to time. That's what it's the Celtics. But part of that is Kemba Walker's decision-making process and his aggressiveness to take those shots. And you saw this even in Game 7, Shaw, where there were numerous opportunities for Kemba Walker to get, once he gets past that first line of defense, teams would tend to collapse, and he sticks himself somewhere in like the middle of nowhere. He's like in the Bermuda Triangle. And rather than just taking the shot, he goes and he passes it off to someone who's going to take an even worse shot than before. I just want to see some more aggressiveness from Kemba Walker. I think that, to me, is going to be so key for the Celtics to have any chance in this series.
Any chance? I mean, that's drastic, but I think for sure he's got to be better than he showed. And for real, as we alluded to, he has to drive the basketball. That is clearly his advantage. And he's also been a Heat killer, like, in his career. Like, he's given the Heat fits over the course of his career in the NBA. And I think that's something that cannot go away in this instance. And again, it harkens back to our earlier point with Gordon Hayward. If and when he comes back, that also helps the bench for the Celtics, one way or another, whether Hayward's coming off the bench or Smart's coming off the bench. You're getting a boost, presumably in some form or fashion, with one of those two guys. And that's something that I suspect is probably more of like a game 3 type of thing.
I wouldn't be surprised if Gordon Hayward actually is sticking Bam Adebayo. I mean, and I think that would actually be a good thing. It's not even a question of whether or not Gordon Hayward is capable of sticking him. It's just knowing that the way that Spoelstra is probably going to use Bam Adebayo, you're buying time for Gordon Hayward to get his legs underneath him without him being forced to have to commit so much on both sides of the basketball.
Yeah, I mean, because Adebayo is not going to be running through screens like Herro and Duncan Robinson and Hayward, having to trace those or trip over a ball screener or something the case may be. So I see where there's value there too. The other good thing for Boston in the one aspect is Miami's not as long as Toronto is. Yeah, they're good defenders in general, and we haven't really mentioned Iguodala, so to speak, but not all those guys are going to be out there at the same time. But it's not like when Tatum was trying to drive and then Siakam's guarding him, and then Anunoby comes over, then Ibaka or Gasol are guarding the paint. They don't have anybody Ibaka or Gasol size. I mean, it's Adebayo, Myers, Leonard, and Olynyk. I guess Olynyk may see sometimes here, but he's not really. He's a better defender, but on the ground defender. He's not in the air blocking shots. That type of thing. I think that's where the Celtics may have a little bit of a reprieve and might feel a little bit better, especially if they drive the lane. Because those defenders are not as long, and all those guys swiping at the basketball. And again, don't get twisted. Jay Crowder and obviously Jimmy Butler are very good defenders, but it's just a little bit different when you just consistently see that length, or you just have to be fearful because Ibaka or Gasol is down there in the paint, just kind of walling it off, waiting for you to come up. And Gasol blocked God knows how many shots in this series. And I think another key for Boston too is it's obviously the play of Jaylen Brown. hopefully he's okay. You know, I have some Miami fans already tweeting at me. It's like, oh, he's a groin injury. He's out 2 weeks. Either like, I guess wishful thinking on that. It didn't look good, you know. But more importantly,
them in their back room, you know what I'm saying, doing the voodoo thing.
I can't. I'm not even anyway. But I think it was Goodman Sports, or I'm forgetting his name right now. I'm sorry, I can appropriate credit on Twitter. But at one point, I think Jaylen Brown was 15 for 55 from three. So I think he made one after that. So he might have finished 16 to 56 or something like that in that series against Toronto. Good God, man. Good God. You were a 3-level scorer. Go to the basket. And I think versus Miami series, he's another guy who can definitely do that, especially if they try him and put Duncan Robinson on him, post that guy up. You got to go down there. No, Duncan Robinson ain't no punk, and they're going to send help. But you've got to try to take advantage of these things and just put the three in your back pocket every now and then. Again, I know that's how they played it. I know, but they have some advantages here that I think they can definitely take advantage of if they're smart and pick their spots accordingly.
All right, so with that being said, Shaw, and I mean, we've gone through so many different variations of what, you know, the Miami Heat will need to do in order to win this series, or the Boston Celtics, what they'll need to do to win this series. But I'm curious from your perspective, who's going to be the impact player, or who should be or needs to be the impact player for the Miami Heat and respectively for the Boston Celtics?
You know, that's interesting for Miami because we just finished saying that, you know, they don't really care who kind of gets it done. Jimmy obviously can get it done towards the end of games, and he's the most likely candidate, obviously just being their best, most versatile player. But I think it's Adebayo, really and truly. Yes, the three-point shooting, all those things matter. Hero, Duncan Robinson, Jay Crowder, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Adebayo really has a clear advantage in this series, as I alluded to. And I think he's got to be a guy who's in, 20 to 22 a game, 10, 12 rebounds, whatever, how many blocks and steals that he does. And we already know that he passes the ball efficiently, for 2, 5, 6 assists a game as well, too. To me, Miami can play through Adebayo and have a clear-cut advantage. He's just – the Celtics have nothing for him because of his versatility, because of his ability to even dribble, and his obviously ability to hit the mid-range as well, too, and then posting up some of the smaller guys when Boston tries to throw Grant Williams out there on him or whatever else that Stevens may try to do.
And for the Celtics?
For Boston, it's Kemba. It's kind of a twofer. It's Kemba until Gordon Hayward comes back. So then, and it's like, once Hayward comes back, what is he doing? Really and truly, because if he's coming back and he's really like struggling and trying to shake off that rust, Miami's not the team. You can't be shaking off the rust versus this Miami team in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, you have to come back almost like ready to go and ready to contribute. Otherwise, you may do more harm than good.
But I think, and I guess to add to your point, this is where I think if you are Brad Stevens, you have to be very careful about what you're expecting or what you're needing Gordon Hayward to contribute to what the Boston Celtics really need. Like, this is not the series where I think you have to question if whether or not the Boston Celtics need any more offense. I think they've got plenty of offense. I mean, I've seen moments where even Daniel Tice, when the team's struggling to make shots, he gets up in there and gives you like some, 5-10 points in a quarter, which I think is excellent because that's not something that you're expecting, but it means that he is capable of scoring that basketball. Jayson Tatum dropped 29 points in this game 7. Jaylen Brown, he's capable of giving you 20 to 30 points. Kemba Walker, 20 to 30 points. So it's not like the Celtics don't have enough firepower. And if you are waiting for a key player to come in and help you, don't force it that he has to find his game and the way that he's supposed to score in a series, to your point, like against the Miami Heat, to do that. Just take what he's able to give you at the moment. He will find his game. I think that, to me, is the best way to kind of put an exclamation point to the point about what we would want to see from a guy like Gordon Hayward, because I think that that's been his Achilles heel since the gruesome injury, is that he has been so fixated on figuring out a way of where he fits in offensively for this team that he becomes a liability most times than not. Where I feel like he can become an asset is when he can do all of the little intangibles of what's been exposed about the Boston Celtics in this past series against the Toronto Raptors, to do the things of why they really, really need him in this series now more than ever than when he was missing in the series before.
Right, and I think versus Toronto's zone specifically, not having another shooter and more importantly, another playmaker, another guy who could just handle it off the dribble was an issue, I think, for Boston at times. And he'll take some of those Wanamaker minutes. He'll take some of those Ojeleye minutes that, they're just not necessarily ready for right now. So, again, another key too, we'll give you a bonus here is obviously the defense of Marcus Smart, especially if he can continue to be effective offensively, shooting the three-pointer like the way that he has. But what he's giving to Boston defensively right now is just, it's invaluable. That's why he's first team all defense.
Block on Norman Powell.
That was just massive. Took a charge. It's just, he understands what it means to play championship level defense, and I don't know if Celtics are championship level, but it won't be because of his defense that it doesn't happen. He may miss some threes or make a bad decision with a turnover, but his defense is definitely going to be there. And I think that's a big key to the series as well.
To your point, Shaw, for every two bad offensive possessions Marcus Smart gives you, he gives you one game-changing, quarter-changing defensive play.
Like Steven said, home runs.
Take that every day, twice on Sunday. Because that, to me, is exactly the reason why the Celtics didn't move Marcus Smart. How many times have they had an opportunity to do that, right? Yeah. So with that being said, Sean, I think we've pretty much exasperated almost every conceivable aspect there is about what we hope to see and what we're anticipating to see in this series between the Celtics and the Miami Heat. You know what time it is, right? Like, we got to pick it, right?
Yeah, this is a tough one, man.
In your words, who you got?
This is the pick 'em, really. Somebody texted me recently and said, what are the chances? I said, this is a 50-50 series, simply because, yes, on paper, Boston has the best player in the series, and Butler's not that far away from Tatum, especially at this stage of Tatum's career, so to speak. But I still take Tatum over Butler. But ultimately, Miami's depth is killer. It's massive. And again, as I alluded to, guys who are not afraid to take big shots. I'm going to go with Boston in 7, especially because Hayward's coming back. But I could see Miami winning in 6 or 7 just as easily as well, too. But, my on-the-record pick for the baseline Eastern Conference Finals preview is going to be Celtics in 7. But whew.
I feel like anytime I make a pick, it's like the kiss of death.
It's been a rough series. It's been a rough round.
All right. So, but you know what? I'm going to ride with you on this one, and I'm going to go with the Boston Celtics in 7. Now, I will add this caveat. The Miami Heat is the type of team that's capable of pretty much winning one, maybe losing one, and then running off 2-3 straight. They have that kind of capability. And against a team like the Boston Celtics, the Celtics could be susceptible to something like that. That being said, what I'm just basically saying is the Miami Heat would basically have to go through a gentleman's sweep or probably have to take it in 6, but they do not want it to go any further for it to go 7. I just think that if the Celtics find themselves playing in a Game 7 against the Miami Heat, no matter how they get to that point, Brad Stevens, Tatum, Brown, Walker, they're going to find a way. They're just going to find a way. They're the kind of team that they're not going to get blown out in a Game 7. And even if they hang around, they will make enough shots. They will force the Heat to go in enough droughts that the confidence will build on this team to say, we finally want to get to this thing. We finally want to get to the finals and at least give some of these guys a chance, to see if they can beat whoever's coming out of the West. So I agree with you there. I think it's going to go 7 games. And I think if it goes 7 games, the Boston Celtics are going to advance to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, and I think just almost doubling down on that same point. It's the same issues I had about Miami with the young guys and their 3-point shooting. It's not so they've lived up to it, but if it has to go to a 7th game, then they have to prove it. And at least in this series, Boston has proven it, at least for right now.
Very easily come off like the Golden State Warriors, or they can come off like the Houston Rockets.
Yeah. Desperation,
shooting that 3 ball. And if you're Erik Spoelstra, when do you pull the plug on that? When do you say, all right, guys, let's change it up a little bit. I'm not saying that Spoelstra is not capable of making adjustments. I'm just saying if you're Spoelstra and you don't want to rock shake the confidence of these guys, but you realize that, hey, whatever you're doing right now is not working, and you're not afforded the luxury of just saying, well, you'll figure it out in the next game or two. I mean, that's a series momentum changing type situation. You know what I'm saying?
Well, so, I mean, the only counter to that is, they still have Jimmy Butler. So I think if he sees it going awry, he's going to step in. But in general, I definitely feel like from being just battle tested, even against Toronto, the defending champions, yes, without Kawhi Leonard, this was monumental for the Celtics.
But to your point, though, Shaw, to your point, Butler's never really been in this situation either.
Nope.
And so that could also test the veracity of his leadership skills, of him stepping in and saying, we need to change it, or him doing something on the basketball court to kind of change the atmosphere, the feeling, and the confidence level that may dwindle if the Celtics take advantage or go on runs and things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic kind of shakes up, because this is exactly why Jimmy Butler came to Miami. He came to kind of take, the Miami Heat post-Wade County, into a completely other district, maybe Broward, where you at?
Well, I said the Celtics-Raptors series had the –
I think there's a Butler County in Florida. There's always a county in Florida. Yeah.
Well, I said the Celtics-Raptors series was probably going to be the one of the best we saw in the playoffs. And I'm going to say it again. I think the Celtics Heat is probably going to be one of the best we see in the playoffs as well, too, man. This is really something, again, a young team in Boston that has some great star power, great coaching, versus a young team in some ways in Miami too, that is just on the upswing, just riding a wave right now, almost collegiate-like, if you will, like a March Madness type feel, especially appropriate here in the NBA bubble, man. So stay tuned. It's going to be one hell of a series.
Absolutely. Well, once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning in with us. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at Game Face Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Just look for the Baseline. Add us to your playlist and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. And also to our Dash radio listeners, be sure to check out the Baseline NBA show Tuesdays, 1 p.m. And we also rerun our show on Wednesdays as well, too. We do it for everybody, man. We do it for every conceivable platform that you could think of. So don't act like you don't know that little logo behind my man's shoulder ain't around these social media parts, man. We stay busy, baby. We stay in the shadows like flex. All right. Once again, y'all, we appreciate you hopping on board. And as always, man, thank you for listening. And hey, enjoy the series. You know that we got one coming up as well, too, to cover the Western Conference Finals. So be sure to keep us on lock. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. We'll catch up with you next time.